one of the things I've always wanted to do is get my A&P license. I'm an engineer by trade, but for whatever reason, I always wanted to have my A&P license. So as I built the two planes, and I'll talk a little bit about them, this was always on my mind. So finally last year I had a little bit of extra time, and so I went and did it. So I'll talk through kind of, this is really the whole process that I went through and so on. So kind of why did I want to do it? Just really part of it is, you know, you built the planes and there's lots of stuff online on how to build them. You got really good manuals and all that stuff. And then you actually start maintaining the planes and there's not a whole lot of good information. So first time you time a magneto or do a compression tech check, not a lot of information out there. So you rely on people. I think, Joe, you might have helped on the first one or two. So you get people to help you out, but not a lot of information really out there on maintenance. So to me, this was a good way to learn a lot around how to do maintenance, which really then fed into confidence around doing the condition inspections on the plane, right? So I feel a lot more confident now than I did a couple years ago, just based on what I learned here. Something I always wanted to do, I talked about that. The older I get, the harder it gets. I think of my memory 10 years ago and where I am now, and I figure if I waited another 10 years, it'd be hard to remember my name, let alone try to remember all the questions on that test. So I said it's now or never for this. So for the rest of you, keep that in mind. Allows me to work on certified aircraft, obviously, and then I've always had in the back of my mind when I retire someday, maybe just doing RVs, maintenance on RVs for those who buy them secondhand and can't do their own. So anyhow, that was kind of the reasons why I wanted to do it. Next chart. So requirements. There's actually only 3 requirements, so not many, pretty straightforward. First one's really easy except for maybe one individual in the room here. You got to be 18 years old, and then obviously you got to be able to read, write, and speak the English language. That was an easy one for me. The second one is you have to get either 18 months or 30 months of practical work experience. So it's in hours. The key part here is the reason it's in hours, which is good, is it doesn't have to be continuous. So you could do it over 20 years as long as you're keeping track of it. You just need to show that you met the numbers. Okay. The 2880 is if you just want to get one certificate, power plant 4 airframe. You need the 4800 if you want to get both the full A&P. Okay, and then you have to pass 3 tests, which I'll talk a little bit about. You got a written exam, an oral test, and then a practical test. Okay, so not that.
So a guy coming down to the school down here at the end of the street,
yeah,
he's still got to go out and get practical experience.
Nope.
No,
so
he's got the experience.
He meets 2 based on the school. Okay. He still has to do number 3 on here. He still has to take all the tests. Okay. Right. So that's and I don't talk a lot about it, but that is the alternate way of doing it, right? You go through one of those schools for I think it's about a year and a half.
2 years, and it's 1,800 hours. The FAA, since it is a part, whatever the 40 school, they've got the program set up so if they do it and you get 1,800 hours. Except trying to get 1,800 hours of training in a 2-year period allows for no sick days.
Yeah. Okay. So you guys started squeezing that. Yeah. Okay. So it's less than this, and yeah, that's I think probably the way most people do it relative to getting your A&P. Okay. Next chart. Let's see. So here's the steps that I went through, and I'll talk a little bit more about them in detail. But first thing is you got to be able to show you how the experience. So if you build airplanes, you probably have builder's logs, so that makes it fairly easier. I had all the builder's logs. The other thing I kept though was, because I knew I was going to do this, all the maintenance. So anytime I do maintenance, right? Normally you would just do the maintenance, sign it off in your log, but I kept records of what I did, how many hours I did it, the date, and all that. So I would have it when I ultimately went to the FAA for my experience. Okay. So I did that. Then you have to go up to the FSDO. In my case, I went up to Windsor Locks and get an 8610-2. And I'll pass mine around. Just you want to take a look at it. So what this does is it just says what the intent of this is to show that you've met the experience and you're qualified to take the test. That's all this is doing. Okay. And I said I have on here, don't take no for an answer. Originally I got a no. I was walking out the door and I'm like, I know other people have did this. So I went back and I talked to the guy and he's like, I can't, you can't use experimental to qualify with the hours. And so I said, all right, is there anybody else here that I could talk to? Went to get his manager. Turns out he's like, I've done a couple of these for you already. Yeah, you can do this. So he sat down with me about it, 2 hours later, I walked out the door. So it is very much, you know, you always hear the FAA, you know, individually owned and operated. I saw that over and over again, multiple times throughout this. If you don't like the answer you get, go talk to somebody else, and you may get it. Because there are, you know, just looking online, there are entire FISDOs that just say we're not going to do this, whereas other ones are open to it. So, okay, and obviously the one up here in Windsor Locks was open to it. Okay, so pass all 3 written tests, 2 hours each, about 100 questions. You need 70% to pass. So there's a general PowerPoint, or general airframe and power plant. You have to pass all 3 oral tests. It took me 3 hours. I don't think there's a time limit. It was about 500 questions. And then very similar to the questions on the written tests, and I'll talk a little bit about that. And then the practical tests. You have to do a bunch of practical things. I'll walk through the list that I had to go do just to show that you're competent. Again, that one can go on for very long. For me, it ended up going on for about 2 hours, so it's pretty quick. I was in and out. What I will say is for both the oral and the practical, all of it's pre-assigned these days by the FAA. So the examiner really has no flexibility on what he wants to do. He has all the oral questions provided to him from Oklahoma City, as well as all the practical tests that you gotta go do. Okay. Next.
So the practical is not up there at the FISDO too, or?
I did it. I'll talk about. I actually did it at a school in Long Island. I don't think it's done at the FISDO. Maybe
they don't have the
knows.
facilities at FISDO.
Right. There's like 2 or 3. I did look. There's 2 or 3 places in the state where they will do it.
Yeah, Steve Kelly's the one down the front.
Yeah, that was the one.
There's another up in Pittsfield.
Yeah. So that's an alternate way to do it. And I'll talk it. But for me, it was just a lot faster and easier to go to the school. Okay, experience. So I brought this one up because I actually needed this. I had to pull this out when I was down in New York when the head of the FISDO down there said I don't meet the requirements out of the New York FISDO when I was going to the school, and the day before I was supposed to take the oral and practical test. Basically, this is out of their actual FAA handbook. So I had to. Fortunately, the EAA a couple years ago had bullet number 2 added to this, so we can thank at least I can thank EAA for that. The two that are important on here is I'm not going to go through all of them. The first one though is you got to show the practical experience, right, for basic knowledge and skills around procedures, practices, materials, tools, machines, that sort of thing. But then the second one is the one the EAA had them add in, which is experience gained from work on an experimental amateur built aircraft will be evaluated on its own merits to determine whether it fulfills the experience requirements. So a little gray. I wouldn't say it's black and white. So again, this gets back to the individual FISDO and I think the comfort of that individual as to how they're going to interpret the merits to fulfill the experience. Okay. So, but this definitely helped when I went down to the FISDO down in New York. Okay. So that's all I'm going to say on that. But if anybody, right, if you get questioned by the folks in the FAA, nothing better than pulling up their own handbook to show them here's what's, because quite honestly, they don't deal with this a lot, right? They're used to dealing with the schools. They're used to dealing with that. Experimental's kind of out of
You guys
their
coming out of
FAA.
industry.
Right, right. So this is I'll say it's rare, and some of them have never even seen it. Okay, so that's all I have on that one. Yeah.
I did my A&P license the same way you're doing, and I ran into the same thing 25 years ago, and nothing
changed.
Go to one desk and ask them a question, they say, I don't know what you're talking about, the next guy says, oh, I know that. Or
Yeah.
You walk out the door and someone says, hey, by the way, you can do it this way.
And that's why I think a lot of it wasn't that they were good or bad, it was just that some of the people I talked to just had never done it or seen it before, right? And so, right. So the trick is to find somebody that actually has done it before and knows, and then you'll get by. Okay, let's see, next chart. So talking about experience for those of you who haven't seen my plane, so this is the RB-8A, this is the 8. According to my builder's log, I put in 2,862 hours to build it. So I use this as part of my experience. Next chart, Bogdan. I'm going to page through these real fast. This is the RB-10, 25 Alpha Golf, and this one was 2869. Ironically, pretty much the exact same time. It was a quick build, so I thought it was going to take a lot less, but it was a bigger plane, and with a lot more complex panels, so at the end of the day, it ended up taking me about the same. So I have both of those in the hangar down here at the end of the road. Next chart real quick. So I had those hours, and then, like I said, I kept pretty good maintenance logs for both of the planes over the years. So I had 596 hours at the time of maintenance that I was able to demonstrate when I went up to the FISDO up in Windsor Locks. So next chart real quick. So this was kind of the summary, because I went up there with all my logs, nice and typed up and everything else. This was the summary page that I started with. Kind of broke out all the hours, total 6327, more than met the 4,400 or 4,880, whatever it was, to get the full AMP. Okay. Sure. This is just kind of, this is how I had it laid out. This was actually the maintenance records. So what you can see is, basically I just had the year, the date that I did the work, the tail number that I did it on, the number of hours, and then just kind of a really brief description of the work that I did. So I had probably 30, 40 pages of this between all the builders, between the builders' logs for the two planes, and then a handful of pages around maintenance for between 2004 basically and 2013. Okay. So ultimately, I was successful walking through that. Like I said, it took about 2 hours. He sat down with me, wanted to know a little bit about my background, what I did, you know, education, paged through some of the logs, right, just to kind of verify that I'd done the work. And at the end of that, he signed it off, and I was good. This then gave me the ability, or it basically said I meet the requirements and I'm qualified to take the oral and the ring test. That's basically what this did for me. Okay, and that was up to FISDO. All right, so then on to the written test. So life got busy. That was December of 13. I didn't do anything until about September of 17, at which point I said, that was when I said, boy, my memory's getting bad. I better do this now or it's never going to happen. So that's when I got serious about it. The next step was the written test. So 3 separate tests: general, airframe, and power plant. 2 hours, 100 questions each. I think I call it VIP. I think now it's Premier. It's the place right down here at the testing center. So I did it with a prep course. It was a King course that I had. Here it is right here. I'll just pass it around. This is actually about 20 of these in the whole thing that I came with. But honestly, I wouldn't have passed without it. It's because there's just there's thousands of questions. And given my background, I know the small stuff, but a lot of very detailed questions. A lot of it on larger airplanes and so on that I just have never had a chance to work on. So. Definitely, if you want to do it, you're going to need some sort of a prep. The King course, there were DVDs. Basically, you sit in front of your TV and you learn. They basically take you through everything you need to know. So you spend a lot of time learning, quite a few hours of that. Practice tests in the computer. I mean, they replicate the exact test. So when I went in to take the test over here, it was like I was just sitting in front of my computer taking another practice test. So that made it pretty easy. Going in, I pretty much knew about what I was going to get based on all the practice tests. 95% of the questions were actually on the practice test. So King, however way, shape, or form, is able to get a lot of what's on the test. So literally 95% of what I saw on the test was what I had already seen on all the practice tests on King. So it's kind of like I already kind of knew the answers to them. At the end of the day, it took me about 20 minutes to do the tests, and I got like a 97 or more on all 3 of them. Again, it just gets back to when I was there, it was like I had already seen all the questions out of the King, and it was just a matter of finding the right answer. Okay. I will say though, I spent hundreds of hours with John and Martha King. For those of you who have enjoyed their videos, it can be tedious and time-consuming sometimes.
It can be a sterling experience.
But it did take me. And the other thing I will say is do one at a time. So, because I don't think it would have been a lot harder to try to do all 3 and take all 3. There are 3 individual tests, and they're proctored that way. So what I did is I did the general. I spent 3 or 4 weeks just doing all the general, and then I went in and took the test, and then it cleared my brain, and went in and same thing for the airframe, same thing for the power plant. It took me all of the fall to get through all of that and get that done. Okay.
Hey, Aaron, is there a time limit between you completing all 3 tests?
Nope. The only time criteria there is from the time you take the first test until you get your A&P license, you have 2 years. So that's the only thing. Or you got to go back and get a new 8610-2 form. You got to start over again. Okay. Okay, I thought I'd open it up for a little audience participation here. So I grabbed a couple of questions. I thought I would start easy. This is open forum here. So these were 3 off of the general tests. So which coupling nut should be selected for use with a 1/2-inch aluminum oil line, which are assembled using flared tube ends and standard AN nut sleeves and fittings? B, A, B, or C? B.
B.
It's B, yeah. So the -8 means it's a 1/2-inch line.
Mm-hmm.
So for aluminum, is that, another question is for aluminum, is that the OD or the ID, the 1/2-inch?
OD.
OD, correct. How about for a flex tube?
ID.
Yeah, you got it. Those are all additional questions that pop up on the test. Next one, color of an AN steel flared tube fitting. A, correct, black. Yep. And then the third one, correct way to connect a test voltmeter in a circuit is?
C.
Correct. So those were the easy, at least for me, those were the easy ones. I could have gotten all 3 of those without having to take the King video. On the other hand, these 3 I absolutely needed the King video to be able to answer correctly. So the first one, a continuous loop fire detector is what type of detector? C, you got it. So overheat detector. An electric motor used to raise and lower a landing gear would most likely be, and I think I copied B and C twice. Nobody's gonna guess it, this one. It's either A or B. Okay, it's B. It's actually C.
I was gonna say it's a
Split field shunt wound motor. Now, I could have even told you what a split field shunt wound motor was a year ago, based on the DVDs, but I probably couldn't tell you today. And I think what's important, though, is if I ever had to work on one of those, I'd have to go find somebody that could help me with it, so rather than just try to do it.
Yeah.
And then the last one, when charging a vapor cycle cooling system after evacuation, the low pressure gauge fails to come out of the vacuum. What is indicated?
Yes. C.
C, you got it. I made them all C intentionally because I was afraid I wouldn't be able to remember So anyhow.
You shouldn't have told us that, because then we'd be off for the rest of the day.
So anyhow, so that was the first piece of it, getting through the written. Did that over, like I said, you do that over. I did that over here in the they have a room over there. You do it on the computer, fairly straightforward. And there's 3 different tests. For the oral and the practical part, though, I said I'm just going to go to somewhere that I can get it done pretty quickly. So there's a school called American Airmen. They also have a flight school there. It's out at Islip in Long Island, New York. So I went out there. This is just kind of a write-up of what they do. But fundamentally what it is you start Thursday morning, and you take 3 days of classes where they prepare you Thursday, Friday, Saturday. And then on Sunday, you actually take the test, both the oral and the practical test. So it's basically a 4-day event. You're in, you're out. Okay, and so that's at school. So next chart, Roger. So you know, the prep course itself, like I said, 3 days of classroom training, lots of going over paperwork, regulations, and a lot of the stuff they think that'll be covered either in the oral or the practical. 4th day is taking the test with the DME itself. Part of it, you know, I put on here, show off with your written test still fresh in your memory. Almost all the oral questions are going to be right off the written. So, you know, obviously, if I tried to take the oral now, it would be a lot harder than doing it a month after I finished taking the written tests. Definitely do that. The other thing I will say is they do, as part of that, they do know which test. Focus 100% on preparing for the test. They're not teaching you how to be an A&P.
What was the, give me an example of what is that? Was that some hands-on stuff? Or?
It was, yeah, it was the type of hands-on thing. It was examples of stuff they thought you might get for the hands-on test. It was kind of a joke, right? It was like, for example, you know, little on magneto timing, right? So for me, I was also able then to try to do some of the stuff just to make sure, right? So I went over and just.
So you knew what you were going to be dealing with from the physical aspect of what they wanted.
That was, and it was their best guess based on, and part of it is, right, based on the equipment they have available to give the test, right? So they kind of know roughly what you're going to get for the practical.
So were there any hands-on things with pressurization or air none of that.
And I have the list of stuff that I did.
It was all,
It was pretty,
it was mostly GA, right?
it was all GA, 100% GA. They didn't even have a gas turbine there, for example. So yeah, so a lot of it's limited by, yeah, what they have available to get to actually give the test. Okay. So anyhow, you know, this is 100% focused on getting you to pass the test. Like I said, I do it this way again. It was 2 days off of work, Thursday and Friday, and a weekend, and I was done. So pretty painless. So the oral test, 5 separate sections. Questions are pre-assigned. No time limit, but if it takes you too long, they're going to fail you just because you're struggling too much. It was, if I remember right, about 500 questions, so about 100 questions per section. Most of the questions same as the written, focused where you missed the questions. I talked about a lot of this already. And then the prep course, so a lot of the prep work that in the books that they gave, the pre-work, there were a lot of additional questions in there as well. Some of those I did see on the oral as well, so that helped as well. And then finally, I mean, I ended up finishing in 3 hours for the oral. We started at like 8, was over by 11. I ended up missing 2 questions because again, it gets back to if you know the written questions and so on, you pretty much know what you're going to get before you walk in there. So. Okay, that was the oral.
Did they give you a hard time about this?
No, he didn't. I think it was about an hour into it before I had the first one. Yeah, so. I mean, I was annoyed. I was starting to argue with him on the first one, and he's like, "Why are you arguing with me?" I'm like, "Okay, fine." And I don't know. Maybe now's a good time to talk to it. But the only other big issue I dealt with was it was actually the Friday of the test, and this was when the New York FISDO, because now I'm down in New York, in Long Island, so they had to actually give the test, right? Or they were responsible for providing the test. The head of the FISDO office, I get a call from him saying, "You're not qualified to take the test." Another one, right? So he's like, "Sorry, nothing we can do," right? So that's when I pulled out. That's why I have the FAA. Actually, I ended up calling EAA, right? They directed me to the FAA, that FAA document. I showed him that. And then he still was like, well, and then he used the wording of, right, I forget, it's kind of vague, right? So he still wasn't bought in. So called the EA back again, and they're like, "You already have a 8610-2 signed, so this guy's not even authorized to assess whether you're qualified to take the test or not. They've already done that." So the guy was not happy when I went back and told him, I'm qualified. This document says I'm qualified, and you're not even assessing me to take this test with my qualification. You're just here to actually provide the test and assess whether I met the requirements of the tester. So he was very unhappy. He left.
That went down sideways.
Went down sideways. Fortunately, the DME that I got, the designated examiner, knew nothing about all of that happening. And so, because I was afraid that, you know,
Yeah.
it's kind of like, I'm done.
He just wanted his $300, that's all he
Yeah.
wanted.
So anyhow, so again, but that was another one where, you know, if you just take no for an answer, I would have been out of luck and I would have been driving home that Friday night. So, okay. So here's the practical test. So this was so you do the oral. It was like from 8 to 11 in the morning. We went over then to another room and did the practical. Again, the tests are the items are pre-assigned by the FAA. I say pre-assigned, but I think it felt like he had maybe twice the number, and he had to choose from that list based on the equipment that was available at the facility. So I think that's how it really went down. Again, no time limit. So this is what I ended up having to do. So change a tire, just the time the tire laying there on the right, just, you know, take the bolts out, put a new tube in, put a new tire in, that sort of thing. So that was like a 15-minute job. Balance a control surface. This one was interesting. He really didn't have any experience at this, so I kind of walked him through it a couple times in the RV. So he learned a lot about balancing control surfaces. Time of magneto, he made me do that on one that was attached to it. They did have a piston engine there without the spark plugs in. Assemble a flex hose. This was, he gave me, you know, just a piece of hose. I had to cut the hose, put the ends on, pretty simple. Safety wire, turnbuckle, pretty straightforward. And then replace the cylinder.
They provided all the tools for that.
They had all the tools, for example, the flex hose, right, they just had a roll of flex hose there, and then they had from Aircraft Spruce, the ends kind of in the bag, still brand new, right? And then they had all the manuals there, so all the manuals you needed were there. and all the parts and all the tools were
Did
sitting
they try
there.
to trip you up by giving you the wrong tool and stuff like that, or?
He did not, he really didn't, he just stood there and watched, Joe, so it was a tool, it was a whole, you know, I had to pick the right tool, he didn't even.
They weren't
right,
laid out?
They weren't laid out or anything like that, so it was like a workshop, and I had to go grab the right tool, figure out which ones I needed. and
Have you
so-
heard of that, Joe, where they'll try to?
No, I didn't. My experience was with Phil Simmons up at with Danielson. He was at DME at the time. He's gone now, but I knew him from way back, and they did kind of like a booklet section, and he gave me some paperwork and stuff. So it wasn't a very strict test. But the point is that they have a huge amount of latitude to do what the hell they want, and unless you know what the rules are, like Aaron said 4 times here, people try to get in his way because they didn't know their own rules. And that's the biggest obstacle. I went back to the FISBO, people that I knew, and they gave me a hard time until someone else that I knew went in and intervened with them, much like your experience, but they knew me.
Right,
I mean,
and yours was
they knew
probably
I was.
harder,
And
because
the local guy.
right, and back then, though, I imagine you were one of the first, at least this, when I finally got the right guy that knew it, he said, oh yeah, I've done multiple of these already. So that helped, I think.
But EAA played a big role in getting mine, even though I had Ray Moore. Some of you remember Ray Moore, and he was on my side. He said, you're entitled to this. He said, he signed endorsement letters. Did you have to provide letters to them to say endorsements in terms of your personality and
No,
your
none of
fitness?
that.
None of that?
I mean, he talked to me, he said, where do you work, right, so, you know.
Well, that had a lot to do.
Where'd you-
with
right,
that.
where'd you-
That they know that you know mechanics, you're a mechanical engineer, so.
Right, so they did ask that, right, you know, what's your education, where do you work, what's your background, so they went through all that.
Maybe they weren't impressed when I told them I was a telephone man.
Where'd you go to school?
I didn't go to school at Elkhorn.
Me?
Yeah.
Notre Dame and MIT ultimately.
Oh, MIT?
But engineering, so that probably helped.
that's good.
And then, you know, I mean, I've been working in Pratt for 26 years now, so.
What
that
was
was
that?
Engineering, 105.
Almost time to retire, huh?
Yeah. And
You're getting old.
start my side job.
That's
So-
a big reason why you don't see Pratt in the news.
The good news here, Aaron, is that I'm talking to, well, maybe excessive, but interesting anyway. I'm talking to the staff at EA, and they dragged me into a program with it. I don't know how many of you read the magazine, but have you picked up the term Mosaic, MOSAIC?
Yeah.
So Mosaic is a program that's been instigated by the FAA to try to expand and broaden the scope of the experimental regulations to allow better access to pre-built airplanes and for maintenance for people who are second owners. And the interesting part of this is that, to your point about wanting to do maintenance for second owners, is half of the experimental aviation fleet home built. Today, I'm not registered to the person who built it. Half of them are not registered to the person who built it. So there's a huge market.
And that's what yeah, so that's what, you know, if I ever did it, RVs only. And the nice thing about the experimentals is, well, for the certified, even with an A&P, you still need the IAA to sign off the inspection. For home builds, as an A&P can actually sign off the inspection itself, so you don't need any help from
So
anybody.
that's a double-edged sword.
I know.
You got the
You get the
ultimate say on
liability.
it, you don't have an
Right.
eye back.
Need to have your name in the logbook.
Twice. So anyhow, got through this. My last bullet on there is, I was very happy. He let me basically I just talked him through the cylinder replacement. That would have been a tough one for me. I've never done one of those. So he let me talk through that, and I was very happy he did. I'm sure I could have got through it, but it probably would have been there for another 4 hours getting through it.
You were using the manual?
Yeah, he had the manual there, so I kind of like talking through it. I said, here's how I would do it.
You almost read it to him.
Exactly,
Yeah.
that's pretty close to that. So anyhow, you know, I suspect there is some flexibility on what they can do, but they are limited because of the way the FAA, right, all the oral questions are predefined. So he just, boom, he's like, here's what I got it in the mail or whatever this morning, and I gotta go through this, and, right, there's no flexibility on that.
We've all been through that, the practical test standards for the pilot certificates you all hold in your license, well, maybe not some of you older guys, but it's all predetermined, and they're not allowed to mix and match
Right.
Mix and match what's that's a good thing.
Yeah,
That's a good thing, because it limits the scope of how far they can go. Because, I mean, any one of those guys could fail any one of us if they decided they really wanted to, and that, or pass us.
Right.
And that's where PTS comes from.
Right. Okay, so that was the practical. Next chart. I got everyone on that. So success. So by 2 o'clock on Sunday afternoon, I was driving away with my temporary airframe and power plant certificate. So he actually was able to type it up right there and hand it to me before I walk out the door. So like I said, it was really nice being able to show up on Wednesday night, Thursday morning basically, and then walking out Sunday afternoon with the paper certificate in hand. Okay.
What did the course cost you?
So I think I got one last slide.
Oh,
Kind of
okay.
goes through the cost and the time.
Oh, okay.
Here were the cost and time. So for the written, the King course itself was $500. Buy it online. I passed it around here somewhere. But again, I probably wouldn't have passed without it, or it would have been a lot harder, that's for sure. The written tests are $450. Those are, I think, non-negotiable. It's $150 per test for 3 tests, and that's an FAA test, your CAPS or whatever. My best guess is I spent probably about $150, maybe a little more than that, just prepping for the written test. So watching all the DVDs 2 or 3 times, and then doing all the practice tests over and over and over again. Okay. Relative to the oral and the practical, so I did have to stay down there, obviously, on Long Island from Wednesday night through Saturday night. Thought the hotels and meals were probably about $750. The prep course itself, so going to the school, was $900 to do that.
It's not bad.
It was not bad at all. The part that was expensive was the DME fee, which is $700, so it's not $300 anymore, Joe. At least down in New York, it's not.
It's the same dollar value, just a bigger number.
Yes.
Correct, the fee has gone up from DME, I think it's $860 right now.
It's now $860, okay.
Wow.
So I got a deal at $700 then a year ago. Yeah, so a lot of it, so if you look at it, at least half of it is just the written tests and the DME fees, or whatever that is, $1150. So it's pretty close to it's half of it. And then my guess is they spent another 150 hours between prepping to go there and then the time that I spent there for the 3 or 4 days. So total, probably about 300 hours and $3,300 to get through all of this. Okay. And I think that was it. Russ.
What about stuff like fabric covering, or any of that? Do they cover that, or would that be possible for them to ask?
FAA is de-emphasizing things like fabric and all that now. Even in the school, they don't do it anymore like they used to.
Yeah, they didn't even have any of the equipment at that room to do it, because that's what I was worried about. It's like, oh, with my luck, I'll get a fabric task.
You don't have to rib strip.
Right, or even composites. Yeah, something like that, I'd be like totally out of my league. No, they didn't, very little of it, even on the written and stuff anymore, Russ. They're really de-emphasizing it. The thought is, with your AMP, because I talked to the guy afterwards, and he's like, well, what were you really looking for, right? The DMA. And he's like, I'm looking for somebody that has good judgment, right? And somebody that if they don't know what they're doing, they're going to go ask for help rather than try to struggle through it on their own. So he said those are the biggest 2 items he looks for relative to, am I comfortable signing this person on?
So they don't give you a repairman certificate that has some sort of limitations on it or anything like that?
No, it was whatever that chart was. It's just
Okay.
Just 2 words.
Yeah,
Airframe
it's
and
like
power
aim,
plant.
airframe and power plant, and you're it. There are some currency requirements. I can't remember if it's 500 hours every year or every other year. That you get.
Where's that in writing?
What's that?
To maintain your AEP certificate?
It is there, Joe. I can't tell you off the top of my head anymore. I was
Ken?
surprised to see it.
Until
What was that
suspended,
again?
surrendered, or revoked.
You need 500 hours to be current. You need 500 hours. It was either every other year or every year. And I was surprised because I never heard that before.
I never heard that.
Really?
Yeah.
I mean, I heard that, but I've never seen it.
It is somewhere in writing, Joe. I forget where it is.
Do
That
not
was,
find that.
I couldn't, and I got that to the school, they said this will come up on your oral, and I think it might have come up on the oral, because nobody knows it, and I think that's why they're pushing it, so.
For an IA, yes.
A and B. Now, it's very vague on what it takes they're very vague on what it takes to get current again, if you fall out of that currency. So I think that's part of it, it's very, yeah.
Did
So-
they take into consideration your time with jet engines at Pratt & Whitney?
Not directly. Maybe indirectly. For example, the DME, right? He worked for the FAA for many years. He actually worked with Pratt as part of that, so he's really familiar with like 4000. So, we talked about it. I don't know if it was he was just curiosity, or if he was just trying to assess, right, decision making, experience, that sort of thing.
I think my bottom line on that is they don't very often get to talk to someone like you with all the stuff that you know, so that plays big for you. I don't mean that they cut it any slack, but the interest in someone like you, by those technical piece of people that would dig into them, is like they would dig in as much as they can. That's my experience.
Because the FAA people wanted me to go for my A&P because I had so many hours building jet engines at Pratt & Whitney, and they put that toward the PowerPoint experience with the building engines.
Yeah, you probably could have used it for either or, I think.
Yeah.
But I think they are looking for something, right? The fact that you've actually done that work, right? I mean, it just shows you've done it, and right, you have the experience.
One of the things that was different with me is they wanted me to separate my engine maintenance and time overhauls and stuff a lot more than I imagined they would. And luckily, I had worked with two guys who are long gone now, and they took my word for it because Ray Moore knew those mechanics. I can't think of it. I think of remember the person like you. I can't remember their names at this point. But they made a not a fuss, but they made a point about that.
Yeah,
Have you ever had a crankshaft out there?
Right.
I didn't think.
I was worried about the power plant. I was worried about just because if I had to break the hours out, there's no way I had done. I'd maybe come up with 50 hours of compression checks and.
Joe is right.
Timing.
He said you can't remember anything. You did take it at the right time.
In fact, I don't think I could pass it. Doing the cramming that I had to do, I don't think I could do that again.
I was 53 or 54 years old when I took mine, so I could still remember what my name was.
Is there any welding involved?
There was no welding.
No welding.